In the depths of the unknown, where shadows whisper and fear takes form. Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub, the place where classic horror and mystery come alive. Tonight, I bring you a reimagined version of The Dweller in the Gulf by Clark Ashton Smith, retold with a suspenseful narrative style that grips the soul and breathes new life into this haunting tale. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the shadows. The horizon erupted with motion. A vast cloud surged upward, unfurling like some imprisoned spirit finally freed, its body a towering pillar of rust-red dust. It marched across the barren plain with dreadful majesty, staining the heavens a murky, brine-dark hue. "A sandstorm," muttered Maspic, his voice edged with unease. Bellman's reply was sharp. What else could it be? Out here, storms come in only one form, the kind the Ihai call the Zooth, and it's bearing straight for us. I've tasted that iron dust before, and I'd rather not choke on it again. We need shelter, now. Chivers, ever watchful, pointed with a hawk's precision. There, a cave in the old riverbank. The three Earthmen, hardened wanderers who scorned the aid of Martian guides, had set out from the outpost of Ahum 5 days earlier, venturing into the forsaken wilderness known as the Chower. Legends whispered of treasure hidden in the dry veins of ancient rivers, pale gold gleaming like platinum, scattered in drifts as if the planet itself had salted the land with riches. If luck favored them, their long exile on this hostile world might finally end. Warnings had reached their ears in Ahum, grim tales of prospectors who vanished into the Chower and never returned. But peril was no stranger to them. For the promise of limitless wealth, they would have walked willingly into the very pit of Hinnom. Their supplies rode on the backs of 3 ungainly beasts called vortlups, creatures with stilt-like legs, plated hides, and necks stretched long as serpents. Ugly beyond measure, yet docile and tireless, they were perfect companions for the desert, able to endure months without water. For 2 days, the men had traced the ghostly bed of a river a mile wide, winding through hills worn down to stumps by endless ages. Nothing stirred there, only boulders, pebbles, and the fine red powder of Mars. The land was silent, lifeless, and still. Until now. The Zooth was coming, a monstrous column of dust, writhing and swelling as if alive, the first sign of movement in a world that seemed long dead. Driving their reluctant vortlups forward with sharp iron goads, the only thing that could stir the lumbering beasts into haste, the 3 men pressed toward the cavern Chivers had spotted. It lay 1/3 of a mile away, high on the sloping bank of an ancient riverbed. By the time they reached the base of the incline, the Zorth had swallowed the sun. A blood-dark twilight spread across the land, thick and oppressive. The vortlups bellowed in protest, their cries echoing like horns of some prehistoric leviathan as they clambered up the terraced slope, steps carved long ago by the retreat of vanished waters. Across the river's breadth, the storm's colossal column twisted and writhed, a living tower of dust. The cavern yawned before them in the face of a low cliff streaked with veins of iron. Its entrance, half choked with rubble and basaltic dust, was still wide enough to admit both men and burdened beasts. Inside, the blackness was suffocating, as though woven from endless webs of shadow. Only when Bellman produced an electric torch did the void surrender the faintest glimpse. A chamber stretching backward into night, widening slowly, its floor polished smooth by waters that had flowed in forgotten ages. Behind them the storm roared. The mouth of the cave darkened as the Zorth struck, its voice a chorus of moans like demons denied their prey. Fine particles of sand, sharp as ground crystal, stung their skin and eyes. "The storm won't pass for half an hour," Bellman said grimly. "We may as well push deeper. Perhaps we'll find nothing but stone, but these caverns sometimes hide gems, violet rubies, golden sapphires. Bring your torches. Keep the beams on the walls and floor." The others agreed. Their beasts, armored in scaly hide and indifferent to the storm, were left tethered near the entrance. Then the three men advanced, their lights cutting jagged paths through a darkness that might never before have known the touch of human eyes. The cavern stretched before them like a tomb abandoned by time itself, hollow, barren, and stripped of all trace of life. The floor, stained with iron, gave back no glimmer beneath their lights, and the walls sloped gently downward, etched with the ghostly watermark of ancient floods. Once, perhaps, this had been a hidden artery of the river above. Now it resembled some colossal conduit plunging into a Martian underworld. Though none of the three men were given to superstition, each felt the same uneasy weight pressing on his nerves. Beneath the silence they caught fleeting impressions, like whispers carried from unfathomable depths, the sigh of drowned oceans echoing through stone. The air was faintly damp, touched by a draught so subtle it seemed imagined. And strangest of all was the odor, a musky animal tang, mingled with the peculiar scent of Martian dwellings. "Think we'll find anything alive down here?" Maspic asked, wrinkling his nose. Bellman's reply was clipped. "Unlikely. Even the wild vortlups steer clear of the char." "But there's dampness," Maspic pressed. "Where there's water, there could be life. Dangerous life." Bellman gave a dry laugh. "We've got revolvers. The only threat I expect is another Earthman with the same idea of striking gold." "Wait," Chivers' voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you hear that?" They froze. From the blackness ahead came a sound that defied reason, a long, unsettling noise, part metallic rasp, part obscene wet smacking, as though countless unseen mouths gorged in the dark. It shifted, retreated, and finally sank into silence far below. Bellman frowned, reluctant to admit unease. Strange. Chivers' eyes gleamed. Could it be one of those colossal, many-legged things the Martians talk about? Half a mile long, crawling in the deep? "Fairy tales," Bellman snapped. "No Earthman has ever seen such a beast. The caverns in these deserts are supposed to be lifeless. I can't say what made that sound, but for science sake, I intend to find out." Maspic shivered, forcing a grin. "Creepy or not, I'm with you." Without another word, the three pressed deeper into the cavern. 15 minutes of steady walking had carried them half a mile from the entrance, and the ground beneath their boots had begun to slope more sharply, as though they were treading the bed of some long-vanished torrent. The walls, too, had changed, rising into shelves of metallic stone, broken by recesses that their torchlight could not fully pierce. The air grew heavier with each step. Dampness clung to their lungs, carrying the stagnant breath of ancient waters. And beneath it lingered that other odor, rank, bestial, and disturbingly familiar, like the musk of dens, or the stale reek of Martian dwellings. Bellman led the way. Suddenly, his torchlight struck emptiness. The channel ended in a sheer drop, the walls falling away into a gulf so vast the beam could not find its bottom, nor the far side. He leaned over the edge, the light carving a narrow blade into the abyss, but it revealed only a cliff plunging into endless darkness. Chiver stooped, hefted a loose stone, and hurled it outward. The three men waited, straining their ears. Seconds stretched into minutes. No echo returned from the black void. Bellman's eyes narrowed as he studied the broken ledges at the channel's end. To the right, a shelf slanted downward, hugging the gulf's edge. It was broad enough for passage,
2 yards across, its surface unnaturally smooth, too even to be chance. It looked less like a natural formation than a road carved long ago into the cliffside, half sheltered by the overhanging wall, like the remnants of some colossal arcade. "There's our road to Hades," Bellman said grimly. "And the descent looks easy enough." Maspec scowled. "What's the point of going further? I've had enough of this darkness. Whatever lies ahead is either worthless or worse." Bellman hesitated, then shrugged. "Perhaps. But I want to see how far this gulf extends. You can wait here if you've lost your nerve." Neither Maspec nor Chivers cared to admit their unease, so they followed, hugging the inner wall. Bellman, by contrast, strode boldly along the edge, his torchlight stabbing into the immeasurable void, swallowed again and again by the abyss.
Step by step, the ledge revealed itself as something more than chance. Its even breadth, its smooth descent, and the half-arch of cliff above gave it the unmistakable air of a road, crafted, not born of nature, but by whose hands, and for what forgotten purpose? The questions loomed as vast and impenetrable as the Martian abyss yawning beside them. Bellman studied the wall, noting how it seemed to curve inward, as though the path might spiral endlessly downward, coiling into the very heart of the planet. The thought silenced them, each man lost in the immensity of ages and civilizations long dead. Then the sound came again. From the depths below rose that same dreadful noise they had heard before, yet now it seemed sharper, clearer. A rasping scrape like metal dragged across stone, mingled with a wet sucking rhythm, as though some colossal thing were pulling its limbs free from a mire. The echo swelled, then faded, sinking into the gulf as if the unseen creature had descended further into the black. Even Bellman, who had scoffed at fear, felt the weight of it pressing on his chest. The sound was terrifying not only for what it was, but for what it implied. Vastness, enormity, a presence too great to comprehend. "Shall we turn back?" Chivers asked quietly. Bellman nodded without argument. "We've seen enough. This place could swallow eternity." They began their retreat along the ledge, nerves taut, every sense sharpened by the instinctive awareness of danger. Though the gulf had fallen silent, the men felt eyes upon them, a lurking menace that stirred panic just beneath the surface of their resolve. None spoke of it, none dared. Maspec moved a little ahead, his torch cutting a pale swath through the gloom. Then he froze. The beam had fallen on a line of figures, pale, rigid, standing 3 abreast across the path. Bellman and Chivers rushed up behind him, their lights converging. The glow revealed limbs, faces, ghastly white, unhumanly still. The throng stretched into the dark, its number impossible to count. The figures stood in absolute stillness, as though they had been waiting for the intruders all along. At first glance, they resembled the Ihais, the native Martians, but something about them was twisted, degraded, as if centuries of subterranean exile had warped their kind. Their skin was corpse-pale, almost fungal in its pallor, and their stature stunted, no taller than 5 feet. They bore the same flaring nostrils, jutting ears, and barreled chests of their surface kin, yet every face was ruined by blindness. Some had only faint slits where eyes should have been, others displayed hollow sockets, as though their sight had been torn away long ago. "What a nightmare brood!" Maspec gasped. "Where in the void did they come from? And what do they want with us?" Bellman's jaw tightened. "I can't say, but unless they're friendly, we're in a dangerous spot. Likely they were hiding in the shelves above when we entered." He stepped forward, bold as ever, and tried addressing them in the guttural tongue of the Ihais. The response was unsettling. A ripple of unease,
followed by shrill, insect-like cries that bore no resemblance to speech. It was clear they neither understood nor could be reached by words, and with their eyeless faces, even gestures were useless. Bellman's hand went to his revolver. "We'll have to force our way through if they block us. Be ready." The metallic click of the hammer echoed like a death knell. At that sound, the pale host erupted in motion. They surged forward in unison, their advance mechanical, relentless, like machines driven by some hidden will. Bellman fired, once, twice, 3 times at point-blank range. The bullets struck true, but the effect was pitiful. 2 of the creatures bled a strange yellow-red ichor, yet none faltered. The foremost, untouched, lunged with uncanny precision, its long, 4-jointed fingers clamping on to Bellman's arm. With effortless strength, it wrenched the revolver from his grasp and flung it into the abyss. Curiously, the thing ignored the torch in his other hand. Its light flickered wildly. As the pale throng pressed in, bodies crowding the narrow ledge, suffocating, unstoppable. There was no space left to fight, only the crushing press of fungus-white forms closing in from every side.
Chivers and Maspic fired desperately, but their weapons were wrenched away as easily as Bellman's had been. Strangely, their captors allowed them to keep their torches, as though the light itself posed no threat. The struggle had lasted only moments. 2 of the pale beings had fallen under gunfire, but their bodies were seized and flung into the abyss with chilling efficiency. The ranks closed again, seamless and unbroken, and the Earthmen were swallowed into the press. Forced to turn back, they were carried along in a living vice, hemmed in so tightly that resistance was impossible. Their only thought was to keep hold of their lights, which now seemed like fragile lifelines in the suffocating dark. The horde surged forward with dreadful momentum, driving them deeper into the abyss. Behind, more ranks pressed in, implacable, countless. Soon the men's own movements no longer felt their own. They marched in lockstep with the blind multitude, their steps absorbed into the mechanical rhythm of the throng. Thought dulled, fear numbed, even speech dwindled to meaningless fragments. They were no longer men, but cogs in a silent, eyeless machine. The only sound was the endless padding of feet, soft, steady, eternal, beating down the spiral road. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the narrow beams of their torches. It was a night older than suns, a blackness that had brooded since the birth of worlds. It pressed above them like a crushing weight, and yawned beneath them like an infinite grave. From its depths rose the stench of stagnant waters, thickening with every step. Onward they went, circling the abyss in a colossal spiral, as though descending the coiled interior of some cosmic tower built for the blind. Time dissolved, distance became meaningless, the gulf seemed endless, immeasurable. At last, after what felt like ages, the march slowed. The pressure of bodies eased, and the Earthmen realized they were standing still, yet their minds still pulsed with the inhuman rhythm of that descent, as though the echo of those countless feet had imprinted itself upon their very souls. Slowly, clarity returned, along with a rising tide of horror. Bellman lifted his torch, its beams sweeping across the cavern. The pale Martians were dispersing into the immensity of the chamber, though several lingered, standing sentinel. At the faintest flick of his light, they quivered, as if guided by some sense beyond sight. To the right, the floor ended abruptly. Bellman stepped to the edge and peered down. Far below, in the abyssal dark, a sickly phosphorescence shimmered like ghostly plankton adrift on a subterranean sea. A foul wind rose from the depths, carrying with it the sigh of unseen waters lapping against drowned cliffs, waters that had ebbed and stagnated through ages beyond reckoning. The vertigo of it forced him to turn away. Behind him, his companions swept their torches across the cavern walls. What the light revealed was worse than the abyss. Colossal pillars, carved with bas-reliefs so grotesque they seemed born of madness itself. The images struck the eye like blows, radiating a malice that was not merely alien, but fundamentally opposed to all human comprehension. Who had carved them, and in what forgotten epoch, was a question too vast to answer. The cavern stretched endlessly, branching into shadowed recesses and unseen corridors. Torchlight caught glimpses of pale, fungoid creatures drifting to and fro, and of obscene, polyp-like plants clinging to the stone like tumors. The walls soared upward into gloom, their heights unreachable, their shadows alive with suggestion. The place was crushing. The very rock seemed to exude darkness, as though light itself were an intruder, fragile and doomed. A suffocating conviction settled over the Earthmen. There would be no escape. A strange lethargy dulled their will, leaving them silent, motionless, as if the cavern itself had claimed their minds. Then, from the reeking shadows, more of the blind Martians emerged. Moving with the same eerie precision as before, they closed in around the men. Without a word, without a sound, they urged the Earthmen deeper into the yawning blackness of the cavern.
Step by step, the three were carried along in that leprous procession, swallowed by a tide of pallid bodies. The obscene columns multiplied as they advanced, and the cavern opened into endless vistas, like the unveiling of foul things that sleep at the lowest rung of night. A drowsiness crept over them, subtle at first, then thickening, as if the air were tainted by poisonous breath. They fought it, instinctively sensing the sleep was not rest, but a seduction. The heaviness deepened. Then they reached the heart of the horror. Between pillars that seemed to climb without end, the floor rose into an altar. 7 slanted tiers, pyramidal and steep. Upon the summit crouched an idol of pale metal, no larger than a hair, yet monstrous beyond any imagining. The blind Martians thronged around them. One seized Bellman's arm and urged him upward. In the slow, helpless rhythm of a dream, he climbed. Chivers and Maspic followed, their minds dulled by the narcotic pull of the place. The idol was unlike anything born of Mars, unlike anything born of creation. Carved from whitish gold, it resembled a hunched creature beneath a smooth, overhanging carapace, from which the head and limbs protruded like a tortoise. The head was venomously flat, triangular, and eyeless. From the slashed corners of its mouth, 2 long proboscis curved upward, hollow at their ends like cups. Short legs issued in regular sequence from beneath the shell, and a braided double tail coiled tight beneath its crouched body. Its feet were round, inverted goblets pressed to the stone. Bestial and unclean, the eidolon seemed to slumber atop the tiers, yet its sleep felt like an emanation. It seeped into the senses, a slow and ancient stupor, a darkness from before the age of light, where life might breed and gorge in the blind mire. Dimly, the men saw the altar swarm with the eyeless Martians, each pressing close, running their long fingers over the idol in a ritual of touch. On their brutish faces, a narcotic joy took root. Compelled by the same decay of will, Bellman, Chivers, and Maspic did as the others, tracing the creature's loathsome contours. It was cold, clammy, as if just risen from slime, yet beneath their fingertips it seemed to live, to pulse, to swell. From it, in heavy, relentless tides, a black vibration poured, an opiate power that dimmed their vision and filtered into their blood, laying a drugged night over the mind.
Their senses, drowning in a strange darkness, registered little beyond the crush of bodies at the altar's summit. Then, as if sated by the idol's narcotic emanation, several of the pale beings eased the men back down the slanted tiers to the cavern floor. Still clutching their torches in numb hands, they glimpsed the chamber swarming, white forms climbing and spilling across the pyramid in a leprous, living frieze that writhed through thickening shadow. Chivers and Maspic succumbed first, sliding bonelessly to the stone. Bellman resisted longer, yet fell into a void of black dreams, sensations alien and unfathomable. An oppressive presence loomed everywhere, a palpable power with no face, exhaling sleep like poison. By degrees, he felt his human self dissolve and became one with the eyeless multitude, moving as they moved, through caverns deeper than thought, along nighted roads that spiraled forever. And still he was something else, a nameless entity, ruler of the blind, worshipped in the abyss, a dweller in ancient, rotting waters that rose at intervals to feed unspeakably. In that dual state he feasted and was feasted upon. Threaded through it all like a third identity was the idol itself, known only by touch, never by sight, for there was no light anywhere, not even the memory of light. Whether he slipped from those murk-stitched visions into true sleep, he could not tell. Waking came as more shadow, heavy, slow, before a lance of light from his fallen torch anchored him to the present. The beam struck an object he could not at first comprehend. It troubled him, stirring a nascent horror to life. Gradually, understanding broke through. The light fell upon the half-consumed remains of one of the eyeless troglodytes. Limbs were missing. What remained was gnawed to its odd articulated bones. Bellman staggered upright, the world still veiled in webbed gloom. Chivers and Maspic lay in dense stupor beside him, and across the cavern floor and sprawled upon the seven-tiered altar, the worshippers of the somniferous idol lay strewn in drugged repose. Slowly, Bellman's dulled senses began to stir. A sound reached him, familiar yet dreadful. A wet slithering, punctuated by a steady, sucking rhythm. It receded among the towering pillars, beyond the sprawled, sleeping Martians. The air soured with the stench of stagnant water, and on the stone he saw rings of dampness, as though left by the rims of inverted cups. They trailed away from the half-devoured corpse, leading into the shadows that bordered the abyss, the same direction in which the noise had faded into silence. Terror surged through him, battling the drugged stupor that still clung to his mind. He bent over Maspic and Chivers, shaking them violently until they stirred, muttering in protest. "On your feet," he snapped, voice harsh with urgency. "If we're ever getting out of this pit, it has to be now." With curses, rough words, and sheer force, he dragged them upright. Staggering like drunkards, they followed him past the slumbering Martians, away from the altar where the white gold idol still crouched in its malignant dream. A heavy fog of lethargy pressed on Bellman, but the spell had loosened its grip. His will returned, sharpened by a desperate hunger to escape the gulf and all that haunted its depths. His companions, still half ensnared by the narcotic influence, stumbled after him in mute obedience. He was sure he could retrace their path, the same path marked by those wet, ring-shaped impressions. Through the forest of obscene, carved columns they wandered for what felt like an eternity, until at last they reached the brink, the threshold of a black Tartarus. Far below the waters stirred. Phosphorescent ripples spread outward in widening circles, as though some massive body had plunged into the putrid depths. At their very feet, the stone bore the same watery rings, pressed like a trail of corruption to the edge.
Shuddering, Bellman turned away, haunted by fragments of his blind dreams and the terror of what he had glimpsed in waking. At the corner of the cavern, he found it, the beginning of the upward road that clung to the abyss, spiraling back towards the surface, towards the lost sun.
At Bellman's command, Maspic and Chivers extinguished their torches, conserving what little power remained. His own beam would have to serve them all until it, too, surrendered to the dark. From the cavern behind came no stir of life, no whisper from the Martians sprawled in narcotic slumber around their idol. Yet Bellman, hardened by years of peril, felt a fear unlike any he had ever known. It sickened him, hollowed his strength as he lingered at that threshold of silence. The gulf was mute as well. The phosphorescent ripples below had stilled, leaving only a suffocating quiet that seemed to thicken the air, to clog the senses and drag at the limbs. It rose around him like the slime of some bottomless pit, threatening to drown him in its grip. With brutal effort, he forced himself upward, dragging and cursing his companions until they stumbled after him like beasts half-drugged. The climb was a torment through limbo itself, an ascent from nadir through a darkness that felt viscous, tangible. Step after step, they trudged along the imperceptibly winding road where distance dissolved and time was measured only by the endless repetition of their feet. Ahead, Bellman's torch carved a feeble tunnel of light. Behind, the night closed in like a patient sea, waiting for the moment when the flame would fail. At intervals, Bellman dared to glance over the edge. Far below, the phosphorescence ebbed, fading like the last embers of hellfire in an extinct abyss, like galaxies drowning in voids beneath the universe. The sight made him reel with vertigo, as though he looked down upon infinity itself. Then even that faint glow was gone, swallowed by blackness, and he knew by this token the terrible height they had gained. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion were crushed beneath the greater weight of fear. Slowly, the stupor began to lift from Maspic and Chivers, and they too felt the vast, oppressive terror that filled the night. Bellman no longer needed to drive them with blows. They climbed of their own accord, compelled by dread. The darkness pressed close, ancient and soporific, like the matted fur of monstrous bats, choking their lungs and numbing their senses. It was the silence of dead worlds, heavy and absolute. Then, after what seemed like centuries, the silence broke. From far below rose a sound they knew too well, the slithering scrape of something vast moving over stone, followed by the obscene sucking of limbs torn free from mire. The noise climbed after them, inexplicable, delirious, like a nightmare given voice. And with it, their terror ignited into frenzy.
God, what is it? Bellman's whisper broke from him like a gasp of drowning. Memory surged back in a delirious flood, the blind eidolon on its altar, the half-devoured troglodyte, the trail of wet rings leading into the abyss. All the fragments of nightmare, dream, and waking converged upon him now, embodied in the horror that stalked the gulf. The answer came not in words, but in sound. The slithering scrape, the obscene suction, grew louder, climbing the cliff beneath them, closing the distance with dreadful certainty. Maspic and Chivers, panic-stricken, snapped on their lights and bolted forward. Bellman, abandoning his last shred of control, followed in a frenzy. It was a race against the unknown. Their hearts hammered, their feet pounded the stone, but still the noise pursued, rising from the depths as though some impossible thing walked the sheer wall itself. Closer, closer, until suddenly it was no longer behind, but ahead. The sound ceased. The beams of Maspic and Chivers' torches struck it first. They froze. Bellman nearly collided with them before his own light revealed the crouching bulk that blocked the ledge from side to side. For a moment, none of them could scream. The sight locked their throats in a paralysis beyond hysteria. It was the idol, no, the living prototype of that blasphemous image risen from the abyss, swollen to monstrous scale. Its humped carapace gleamed with a wet metallic sheen, like white gold slicked with slime. The head, eyeless and triangular, thrust forward on a neck that arched with obscene vitality. From the corners of its cruelly slit mouth rose two proboscises, long as whips, ending in cupped tips that quested blindly in the air. Beneath the shell, a dozen short legs jutted outward, each ending in a goblet-shaped foot that glistened with foul moisture. The thing was ancient. Older than the deserts, older than the dying planet itself. A primal life form that had never left the cavern seas, worshipped by the blind as their god. Its very presence exhaled the same narcotic stupor as the idol, drugging the men's will, freezing their limbs. They stood transfixed, their lights glaring full upon it as the creature reared upright. Its ridged belly loomed above them, and its double tail slithered across the stone with a metallic rasp. The chalice feet oozed their mephitic slime, clinging to the cliff as it shifted its weight, proof of how it had climbed the sheer wall to meet them. And still, the men could not move.
The creature moved with impossible speed and certainty, its hind legs striding in short, powerful bursts, its massive tail levering its bulk forward. The twin proboscises arched with dreadful precision, descending upon Chivers' upturned face. For a heartbeat they rested, sealing his eyes completely. Then came the scream, raw, inhuman, as the hollow cup snapped back with a serpent's lash, tearing away their prize. Chivers staggered, head lolling, his body twisting in half-narcotized agony. Maspic, beside him, saw the gaping sockets, saw the ruin of his comrade's face, yet had no time to recoil. The monster turned, and the blood-slick cups fell upon him. His last sight was the horror of Chivers' mutilation before darkness claimed him forever. Bellman, frozen just behind, understood with the clarity of nightmare what was happening. He saw the obscene precision of the proboscises, heard the cries, first Chivers, then Maspic, each cut short in a crescendo of agony. Then the appendages rose again, questing above the rigid bodies of his companions, reaching for him. Blood streamed down their faces, torches still clenched in stiff, useless hands. And behind them loomed the shape, eyeless, vigilant, relentless, driving them onward, restraining them when they faltered at the brink. Thus began their second descent, herded like cattle down the endless road that spiraled forever into a night-bound Avernus, where no light, no hope, and no return awaited.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.